Okay, I think we're get going here, Mike. If you want to put a side by side of Megan at this time, that'd be a good thing. There we go. So good evening, everyone. My name is Captain Tony Barnes, and I'm one of the members of the NNOA Transition Assistance Team. It is my pleasure tonight to do a quick intro for our guest speaker, Meagan LaBossiere. Meagan is a 2009 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, and she also holds a MBA from Georgetown University. Meagan's Navy career consists of being a H-60 helicopter search and rescue pilot after graduating from the academy and going to flight school. Meagan has more than 15 years of leadership experience in her work in and out of the Navy. And I find it interesting that in her bio includes the fact that she is a member of an organization called the Four Block Foundation in her present job as the senior relationship manager for global commercial banking, living out of Dallas. Formerly, she lived here, very near here, where I am in Germantown, Maryland. But the Four Block Foundation prepares service members for transitioning off active duty for civilian careers in corporate America. And so that's one of the reasons, besides being a most impressive midshipman and then naval officer. Megan and I met while Megan was a midshipman at the academy, and I was on the admiral staff there. And so being impressed with her back then, you can imagine how wonderful it feels for me now to have followed her career and never been more than a computer click away from following her and having invited her and have her accept immediately. Just a matter of finding the right date to make it happen. And so I won't belabor on. I'm sure Megan will talk about many things of interest, as well as you can read her bio on the NNOA.org site. Megan, I show that you're still muted. So if you would unmute and thank you. And once again, let's get it going.
For Captain Barnes, appreciate the invite and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining. I'm humbled at the opportunity to share my story. I think I'll start by saying I'm just one data point, right? So good on you for each one of you for um, being proactive, getting engaged, asking questions, starting early. I think it can be very intimidating and overwhelming when we transition out of service, especially for those that, this is what we've known. We've been wearing the uniform since we were 18. We've always been told what to do, what's the next set of orders, where you're going to go, what you're going to wear, and not having really any autonomy to decide on your own. So I remember when I was first getting out, as simple as, well, where do you want to physically live at? Like that was never really an option to which we could control. So it can be overwhelming, but I think that you are absolutely taking the right steps by leveraging your network. You wouldn't be on this call if you didn't kind of lean in on the networks that you have, ask questions, explore the exploratory conversations to which you're going to have. This is very, very paramount to kind of helping do your diligence. So I just prepared just a brief kind of talking points. How I was thinking about framing the discussion was starting out with a little bit about my journey, how I became to be in the role to which I am today, kind of my journey to get there, and what that actually means when you kind of break that down and speak kind of plain language. And then just best practices and nuggets of advice. So one thing I say is that I really want this to be a dialogue. If you guys have any questions, feel free to jump in. That's not a one-way, discussion. And also, I'd say this doesn't have to be a one and done. So if you have any questions at all, link up with me on LinkedIn. Would love to have a one-on-one conversation on how I can be helpful, whether it be transition, business school, finance, anything and all the above. Kind of happy to be helpful. I would not be in the role that I am today if it wasn't for countless vets who've allocated hours helping me get to where I'm at. So, is there any questions prior to kind of kicking things off and getting started?
So if you
No?
have questions, you can just unmute or feel free to use the chat if you would prefer just to type your questions in there, and I'll be monitoring the chat for the questions that I'll propose to Megan. So I don't see
Perfect.
any questions at present.
All right, sounds good. And don't be bashful, like here to be helpful. So just sharing a little bit about my journey. as Captain Barnes mentioned, graduated from the Naval Academy in 2009. Selected aviation from the academy, so I went down to Pensacola for 2 years. Selected helicopters out of flight school, and I like to call myself an East Coast sailor. So I spent 4 years in Norfolk. During that time period, deployed twice to the Middle East, 2013 and 2015. Served as the primary search and rescue asset for the Arabian Gulf for both those deployments. Let's see, my first deployment, I was the only female in as far as all flyers out in Bahrain during that detachment. So front seat, back seat, so air crew or pilot. And I was one of two people of color. So happy to share kind of experiences on. I think that's actually what's helped me lean in so much in finance is that just very, very comfortable in spaces that maybe have different types of institutional barriers. So happy to kind of chat more about that as well. But second deployment 2015, coming home from that, I rotated off of my sea tour to my shore tour, and I took orders to work at OPNAM N1, so personnel in under the Chief of Naval Personnel, and so personnel and manpower. And during that time period, this was like the fall of 2015, I had made the decision to which I was thinking about getting out and decided to apply to business schools in DC because I know I was going to be on a short tour. So I applied to all the schools in DC and then landed at Georgetown. So I was wearing khakis during the day with OpNav staff, and then I was going to business school in the evenings part time at night at Georgetown. So I did that for 3 years and really used my MBA to kind of leverage and pivot from aviation into finance. And so kind of pausing there, I think it's really important when you think about what's next in your career for you to think about and this is not kind of my terminology. Someone shared this with me and it's just always stuck that you have both industry and you have function. And so you can pivot on both, which typically is the hardest pivot, or you can pivot on one. And so what I mean by that, using myself as an example, as a naval aviator at the Pentagon, right, or at naval support staff, I could, and you see this all the time. You see people leave on a Friday with khakis, come in on a Monday in a suit. All right, so they roll right off of active duty, and now they're a GS employee, or they're working for like Northrop Grumman doing defense contracting. So that would be function. I'm no longer a pilot, but I'm staying DoD. So industry. So function changes, industry stays the same. No longer a pilot, but still remaining within DoD. Or similarly, a lot of my buddies rolled off of active duty and now they're flying for American, FedEx, UPS. So function, aviation, I'm staying a pilot, but industry, I'm no longer defense, I'm now commercial, commercial airlines. And so when you pivot from one, so either you're pivoting from industry or function, oftentimes you have a point of parity. You can lean in on what you know. All right, I'm a pilot and now I'm just flying. I'm not flying for the Navy, I'm flying for American. Or I'm still in defense, I'm still at the Pentagon. I'm no longer wearing the uniform. I'm a GS-14. So the hardest thing to do is when you pivot both industry and function at the same time. And so going from a naval aviator to a commercial banker, right? So very different function industry. You don't have that point of parity. So I say that to not say it's not possible. Obviously, I'm living, breathing example, and countless vets do it. But I want to frame your thought process with what you think you want to do and why you want to do it, and just know that if you do both function and industry pivot, that you're going to have to be prepared for, obviously not having that point of parity after you transition. So it was just to kind of highlight as you're thinking through kind of what you want to do next steps. So prior to my transition, when I was stationed at the Pentagon, I did a lot of career exploration. And what I mean by that, and I'll be like kind of really, really like basic, I did not know anything outside of the military, right? So came in from the academy and then all I knew was the cockpit. And so I didn't have like very good Excel skills. I didn't even have very good like PowerPoint skills until I was literally having to do PowerPoint presentations for the 1-star. And so like I didn't, my technical skill set wasn't there, my technical acumen wasn't there. I mean, as it pertained to like aviation and flying, yes, but outside of that, no. And I remember starting business school and knowing like little to nothing as far as like there'd be terms people would say like B2B, which is business to business, or B2C, business to consumer. I didn't know that terminology, and that's like supposed to be like 101 for business, and I say that to say that it doesn't really matter where you are currently at. It's okay to have knowledge gaps. I think you just need to lean in on them, and you need to be honest with yourself, and you need to give yourself grace, because you're not, it's okay if you don't know, because you've never been in the environment to know. And then one thing I think that naval officers and just the veterans in general, we are highly, highly capable of learning any skill set, right? Any skill set quickly, right? With a high degree of proficiency. We just haven't really been given the opportunity to, because our skill set prior to this has been, mission and service to country. So when you're thinking of pivoting outside of the military, I think you just need to lean in on your network. And the veteran network is so, so strong. I tell people this all the time. Like, I check a lot of boxes. I'm like, gay, woman of color, disabled, veteran. So whatever box you want to check, you have it at your disposal. But overwhelmingly, the box that I have had the most, I feel like the most shared experience, and has been able to open the most doors, and that I've been able to, leverage just astronomically more, has been veterans. And I think that's because of the shared experience in the service to country, and, mission first and camaraderie, and so lean in on that. Like, that is such a strong and powerful network that's at your disposal. So even if that means like reaching out to a random person on LinkedIn, your response rate for a cold outreach is going to be a lot higher when you're reaching out to a veteran than it is somebody that's a non-veteran. So it's okay not to know what you want to do today, but I would challenge you, what are you doing to kind of close that gap? And a lot of what I tried to do, call it 3-4 years from transition, when I was, in DC, was I had coffee chats with my classmates. I was just asking them, like, can you walk me through, like, what's a day in the life of a consultant? What's a day in the life of someone in marketing? Like, I didn't even know, and I'm a commercial banker today. I didn't know the difference between corporate finance and investment banking. It all just seemed very esoteric, like it's just finance, right? You're just talking numbers. And so it's okay not to know, but what are you doing to kind of close that gap? And I just want to challenge you to think about that critically, and think about that early and often, because that's really going to help you do your due diligence to, one, understand what opportunities may be available to you, and then two, help position you accordingly. So you have time to build rapport, you have time to kind of really hone in on what's going to be the best fit for you. Because each one of you are highly skilled, highly capable, tons of transferable skill sets. Oftentimes, where I see veterans struggle is just to be the ability to articulate how those skill sets that you currently possess, that you've currently been conditioned for, how do they translate, and how, like, what's the crosswalk to whatever the new opportunity to which you want to go after. And so that's where I think that you can lean on other veterans, kind of have these strategic, intentional conversations, kind of help you get there. And so sharing my journey. So fast forward, I'm now in business school, and I thought I wanted to go consulting, because most vets in DC go consulting, they're getting their MBA. And so I'm like, all right, so I was involved in a lot of different organizations. Captain Barnes mentioned 4Block. I highly, highly recommend it. I like to describe it as TAPS, but useful. And I'm happy to share, talk a little bit more about what that is. Also, American Corporate Partners, ACP. Both are nonprofits, no additional cost to the veteran. Highly, highly, highly recommend. American Corporate Partners provide you with 1 year of kind of free mentorship. You can say, hey, I'm interested in insert industry, or insert a position, and they're trying to find somebody in that industry or position to kind of help partner with you. For me, I didn't know what I didn't know, so I had like kind of a general. I said, I just need somebody to walk me through career exploration. And what I had this conversation with my ACP mentor, and it was really transformative for me. And I think there are pivotal times in your life where you have these conversations and things just click. So I thought I really wanted to go consulting. I was like, look, I'm going to go consulting. Why? Because I don't really know what I want to do. So I'm going to be a road warrior. This was pre-COVID, obviously. I'm going to be a road warrior Monday through Thursday, grind. And then 2-3 years from now, I'll be burnt out, but then I'll have amazing exit options. And then, maybe leverage one of the projects that I worked on to determine what's kind of going to be my next move. And my mentor, my ACP mentor, said, Meagan, you can do that. And that sounds like a viable path. And I'm sure, if it's going to be within the cards, if that's what you want to do. And he said, or I challenge you to put together a list, call it 3 to 5 things on what matters most to you and why, right? And prioritize that list. and then search for jobs, search for organizations that fit that list, that, you know, align to those values, those key factors to which you desire. Because where you enter in is seldom where you end up. So you can spend 3 years, you know, burning the, you know, midnight oil on both ends, working, you know, 100-hour work weeks, always on the road, and then leverage that experience into something else. Or you can organically come up through a company and spend those 2, 3 years organically moving and learning and figuring out how to network for the firm. And where you enter in is seldom where you're going to end up. So then you spend 3 years actually learning the firm and building your brand and building sponsorship. And so I said, interesting. Like, I didn't think about it like that. So I had to put together my list, and after much thought and much kind of diligence, I landed on, I wanted to do a leadership development program at a Fortune 100 company. And so I was targeting Johnson and Johnson and JP Morgan Chase. And both of them have phenomenal military rotational programs, so leadership development programs for transitioning military vets. Again, if anyone's interested, happy to chat. I landed at JP Morgan, so that's why I kind of won out on the decision. And really, at the time, I didn't know I was going finance. I was interested in it because I felt like the class was hard, and I felt like there's a lot of like institutional barriers to entry, and that's one of the reasons why I chose aviation to begin with. So kind of similarities there. A-type personalities. I want to be on the front line. You know, bankers, they're revenue generating, they're client facing, they get the deals done. They generate, you know, revenue for the firm. So it's very kind of tip of the spear. So very different nature of work, but very similar type personalities and kind of competitiveness, and you want to win. And so with that in mind, I didn't, at the time when I chose JP Morgan, I didn't know I was going to fully end up in finance. And mind you, you can go to JP Morgan and never touch a financial statement, right? You can be HR, you can do marketing, you can do project management, you can do a ton of stuff and never touch a financial statement. So just because you work for a bank doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be in a role of a banker. So I landed at JPM. I chose that, and then I had to figure out where I wanted to be placed at. And this is where, again, I leaned on my network. I reached out to a buddy. His name's Ron Stalin. His wife was one of my instructors when I was at the RAG for helicopters. And so it's just, again, 2, 3 degrees of separation, leaning on the veteran network. He was a JP Morgan Chase commercial banker in DC. And he obviously allocated as much time as I wanted to learn the craft. And after having, I remember he was in the reserve, so he was driving from DC to Norfolk. And I remember having I was supposed to be a 30-minute touch point with him on the phone. And he ended up talking to me the entire way from literally DC to Norfolk while he was on the phone. So he gave me like 3 hours. And at the end of that conversation, I just said, yes, that's what I want. That's what I want to do. That's why I want to do it. Like he sold me on being a commercial banker. And so let me kind of back up before I go and if someone has questions, jump in. I can talk. That's one thing. I'm in the right role because I have but I do want to back up and kind of speak at a high level on what commercial banking is, vice like what it isn't. Because there's a lot of just, again, if I was in your shoes or when I was in your shoes, I did not know. So just speaking from baselining understanding. So, and when I walk people through this analogy, this is not to insult anybody's intelligence. I like to just start from a place of to make sure we're not like losing any people. So you and I are individual consumers. We have our own banking needs. So think of you have credit cards, you have a checking account, savings account, you might have an auto loan, you might have a home loan. Similarly, companies have similar banking needs, right? So they need accounts, they need access to credit, and they need everything in between. And so when you think of the realm of banking, you have consumers, you and I, and they have consumer bank where you physically go into a Bank of America or a JP Morgan Chase, and you have a branch, physical brick and mortar branch where you can do consumer activity. Well, above that, above a consumer, companies, commercial entities have similar financial needs. And so I'm at Bank of America now, and I guess I haven't even gotten there in my journey in the story, but how banks slice and dice this, it's based on how big the company is. And by big, by size, it's top line sales. So if you're looking at an income statement, top line, literally top line revenues, no, not bottom line profit, but top line on the income statement. So how big a company is, if you're between, call it sub 20 million or sub, 50 million, 20 million is JP Morgan, 50 is B of A, but say like sub a number, call it 1 to 50 million, is considered to be the business bank. So if you're a business banker, you hold the relationship with decision makers at these companies that fall within that revenue threshold. And so north of, at B of A, it's north of 50, up to 2 billion. So 50 million to 2 billion, that's a pretty big sandbox. That's the commercial bank. And so as a commercial banker, I manage the relationship with CEOs, CFOs, decision makers of multi-million-dollar companies. So between 50 million up to 2 billion. And then north of 2 billion is our investment bank, which I'm sure you've heard of. Think large transactions happening on Wall Street and reading about it in the Wall Street Journal. So my role and responsibility is truly the relationship manager. So if you are a large company and you have a banking need, you're not going to pick up the phone, dial 1-800 Bank of America, right? You're going to have a dedicated liaison, a dedicated point of contact that you can reach out to for anything and everything. It can be account openings, it can be access to credit, it could be commercial cards, merchant, foreign exchange, hedging, commodities, anything and everything you name. And the cool thing, the reason why I love this job is I'm not the one opening the accounts. We have treasury specialists. I'm not the one, underwriting these loans. We have underwriters. We have commercial card partners. We have merchant partners. We have escrow account partners. I'm the connector. So I'm managing the relationship externally with the client so they can have access to all the full capabilities of the firm. And then I have to manage the relationships internally with all our product partners and make sure that I'm delivering for the client. I'm bringing the right people to the table so they can grow and scale. So that's like at a high level what like a commercial banker does. And so again, think of transferable skill sets. Do you have executive presence? Naval officers, absolutely. Right? Can I hold and articulate a conversation with decision makers? Well, every brief, pre-brief, post-brief, every brief I gave at OpNav to a 1-star, I mean, all of this is transferable. Do you have strong interpersonal skills? Attention to detail? Do you have accountability? Do you operate with integrity? All of these things are very, very transferable to the banking world. Now, what you need to learn like the technical skills, right? Like, can you talk me through financial analysis? And all of that can be taught. Again, I didn't know anything about finance prior to deciding I wanted to join. So I say this, I'm not trying to sell you on commercial banking. I say that to say whatever you desire, whatever that may be, under the sun, you have the capability to do it. It's just a matter of, are you willing to allocate the time? So for me, it was getting an MBA. So I'm able to close that gap a little bit because although I don't have the relevant work experience, at least I have the educational acumen. And then you combine that with the relevant work experience, and now you're kind of working on all cylinders. So I just wanted to pause and kind of give a little bit of
Yeah, quick question for you.
yes.
Where did you acquire the skills to avoid using all that military mumbo jumbo and jargon about department head and hack pilot and whatever, and transfer what you did in the military into an interview conversation and avoid confusing the interviewee with the
Mhm.
with the military ease, so to speak.
Excellent question. Excellent question. And what I would say to that too is, so someone once told me this, and again, these are the countless hours that I put in prior to transition. They said, always use plain language. Always speak for the job you want, not the job you have, right? Speak plain language because you will never lose somebody. If I'm talking to another veteran, if I'm talking to another naval aviator, if I'm talking to another helicopter pilot, and I use plain language, they're going to understand me. You're not going to lose anybody in that conversation. So you have nothing to lose by just speaking plain language. But when you do use, and I've talked to people in the Army and had them throw out jargon, and I'm a veteran. I've talked to people like just in a different, like a submariner, and they throw out jargon. I'm not familiar with that, and we're both naval officers. So you can lose people quickly when you start throwing out terminology. So the best advice I was given is always strip it down, use plain language, assuming that you want to get out. If you're going for some sort of like intel job and you're an intelligence officer, like you can use some like emotional intelligence and say, oh, okay, that's probably the wrong term of play on the term intelligence, but use some EQ. You can speak to, if it's within industry specific, then yes, I mean, highlight your ability and your knowledge to showcase that if appropriate. But if not, if you're doing a function and industry pivot, then don't lose anybody in translation. And one of the best advice that I was given was take your resume and put it in front of somebody who knows zero about the military. Put it in front of somebody who knows absolutely nothing, and then have them just walk through it. Do you understand every single line item on this page? And if they don't, then change it. Down to the point to where, like, I'm not using OpNav staff, I'm saying, like, Navy headquarters. Everybody knows what Navy headquarters is. Nobody knows what OpNav staff is unless you're in the Navy, right? And so it's just, or, within that, the community. And so again, it's being very, very intentional. I think one of the best ways to do that is have mentors. And so American Corporate Partners, ACP, my mentor knew nothing about the military, and I loved it. That was perfect, right? And so have that mentor walk you, he walked me through everything. He said, does this make sense? Yes. Okay. Does this not make sense? What don't you understand about it? And then I changed it. So, like, department head, led a division, like, that doesn't necessarily translate. A division in one corporate entity can mean a very, very different than a division in the Navy. So I just say plain language over all else. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Additionally, it's like, did your MBA courses at Georgetown, did there any part of that focus on your corporate banking eventual job, or did you really learn everything about corporate
Oh,
banking from somewhere other than academia?
sure. I'd say that it helped with the acumen. So I took accounting classes and finance classes. So it helped me be able to navigate a balance sheet, an income statement, a statement of cash flows. So it helped me, like, learn the language, understand, like, what account receivable is, understand what account payable is, understand what, an asset and a liability is. So I was able to kind of understand the language at a high level, but I had no practical application outside of just, like, business cases that we did for school. So any, like, leadership development program, they are really going to teach you what you need to know. Now, what I would say to that is I attacked it like a master's degree. I wanted to be a sponge. I wanted to absorb as much as I could. So just like anything in life, you're going to get out what you put in. You can, like, say, okay, I don't know this stuff and I'm willing to learn it. Or you can just, like, really just grab the bull by the horns and say, I'm going to try to absorb and be a sponge and learn as much as I can, as fast as I can. And I knew for me, so I got out after 11 years. I screened for '04. I put '04 on my way out the door. I had it on for 45 days. I wore Oakley's for 45 days prior to starting terminal leave. And I remember when I screened and I made it, everyone's like, oh, so you're not going to get out anymore. And I'm like, no, like, still transitioning. But I say that to say that I got out at 11 years, which means that, like, I knew that I was pivoting, and I shouldn't say a little bit later in life, but relative to my peer group at JPM that are associates, they're probably at year 4 post college, and I'm at year 11. So I'm like 6, 7 years ahead of my peer group. So I just kicked it in overdrive. I didn't have time to lose. Right. I'm 38. I'm trying to retire at 50. I'm trying to get all the way after it. And so I don't mind if it requires me to put in a little bit of extra time, night and weekends. Like, what do I need to learn? And so I think that any reputable institution is going to have a ton of training. They're going to have it because they want you to be successful, right? They've invested in you, they've hired you, they're, compensating you handsomely, like, they want you to be successful. So again, you get out what you put in. And I think as long as you have the right kind of attitude, and this is another thing too, I'd say that I was able to lean on so many skill sets that I didn't even know I possessed. And I mean that by, like, when you become an officer, obviously you outrank the most senior of senior enlisted, but you don't know your job. So you have to kind of, like, lead with humility. Similarly, as an associate, I outranked analysts, but analysts could run circles around me when it came to a profitability model, when it came to actually doing the day-to-day work. So it's like, how do you navigate that space where, you're still in a position of leadership and you still technically outrank that individual, but then I got to work, like, side by side because they're actually teaching me how to do my job. And I think that that wasn't the first time that I was put in that experience, because as naval officers, that is essentially day one as an ensign that you get that role. So I think you're going to find that you can lean on your experiences so much more than I think we give ourselves credit. We think it's just so new and so different. And by and large, it is. But the underlying skill set, I think, remains the same.
Very good. Very, very good. Okay, this is my warning to those of you that are on the call. In the previous fireside chat, we give you a steady diet of old dudes and old people who retired at '06s and so on. So now we have an opportunity here to get information from a younger transition person. So I'm giving you a warning now. Start coming up with your questions. I'm gonna let Meagan continue for just a little bit, but she's here to answer questions that many of you have had stored back in your brain file for a while. And so I'm going to unleash her on you in a minute. Go ahead, Megan.
Absolutely. So I guess where I kind of left off in the journey was, okay, so now I'm at JP Morgan and I'm in commercial banking. And I'm doing well and I'm enjoying it. I like my partners, I like my portfolio, love my clients, love the brand. And Bank of America comes calling. So they called on me early last year. And given the audience, I probably wouldn't say this openly. So this is kind of a safe space, and I'm gonna trust you all for rapport. Um, the market executive was a Black female, and she was the first Black female market executive for the global commercial bank at Bank of America. And so this was early last year. So I mean, slow clap for that. You know, we're out here still celebrating first. But I took the call. I wasn't interested in moving, but I took the call because, again, she's a Black female that's a market exec. Oftentimes, you'll see people of color in supportive roles. They're either in treasury, they're doing customer service, but specifically in banking, head of banking in Dallas, mind you, in Texas. I said, this is an anomaly. Like, yeah, of course I will meet you for a drink. So, and I initially had told the HR recruiter that I'm not looking to leave JP Morgan. However, if I did ever leave JP Morgan, it probably would be for a Bank of America because I really like the capabilities of a large firm. But I'm not ready to leave. And so I don't really want to go down this road because I wouldn't want, I don't want to engage in that discussion if I'm not ready. So my market exec reaches out, the market exec, Teresa, Black female, reaches out and she says, "Hey, would you meet me for a drink?" And I said, "Of course." So it was supposed to be just a 1 hour happy hour, and it turns into a 5 hour discussion. So we have a drink, we have dinner, we have more drinks. And at the end of it, I'm like, look, like I love what you're doing for the team. Like I love what you're doing for this market. I love what you're doing for us. Like it matters. You can't be what you cannot see. And so for so many different reasons, like I just feel so passionate about this. However, JPM's taken very good care of me. And I mean, from a scorecard perspective, from a portfolio perspective, from sponsorship and brand, I was very, very well taken care of. And I said, like, I just, I appreciate what you're doing. I'm just not ready to leave. And to her credit, she didn't pressure me. So she asked me to apply last year. I wasn't ready, and she just continued to drip on me. And it took 18 months to get me to join B of A. And so 3 months ago, I went across the street. I left JP Morgan and joined Bank of America, doing the very similar role. There, same market, same role, same job. I got the title bump, and I got a huge pay bump. It was a 50% increase in compensation.
Wow.
And yeah, and they're taking care of me. And I feel very strongly, and I say this with like every fiber in me, that her success is my success. So I'm out here running for a completely different reason. And so yeah, I mean, I'm invigorated. I'm passionate. I want to, now deploy all of the skills that the skills and the resources that I've learned at JPM. I'm here to win for B of A. So that kind of brings me up to present day in my role. I'm only 3 months in, so very, very new. Still meeting with like the military team. That's the thing. At JPM, I knew I was very comfortable. I could talk to you about programs. I could talk to you about who you need to know. Like I could flip your resume to like the lead recruiter. Like I knew how to navigate the firm very, very well. In fact, they actually highlighted me in like one of those like veteran videos, like showing me in uniform transitioning to a suit. But that notwithstanding, I am rebuilding my brand at Bank of America, learning who, kind of who's who in the zoo, who I need to get in front of, who are the veterans, who are the players, but just kind of really starting over. So it was the right move for me, but it is scary. And I think my wife told me this, and it was a good reminder. She said, "Megan, you were able to successfully navigate leaving the military and coming to a large organization that you like in finance. Like you didn't know anything about finance, and you were able to navigate that. I think you can handle going from one big bank to another big bank doing the same role." And so it was just like, it was a nice reminder, to me. I mean, I think oftentimes, and this kind of leads into, so that's kind of my story. I'm not sure. I do have some like best practices, nuggets, advice if there's time, if you guys are interested. But one thing that I will share, because I think it's very, very important, is imposter syndrome. Uh, the first day I started at Georgetown, I felt so out of place. I was like, look, like this is Georgetown, like, these people are about it. Like I was really, really nervous. I said, look, I don't, all I know is the Navy. Again, I don't know the terminology. I don't even know like if I'm wearing the right clothes to class. Like I don't know, right? And so you do have this imposter syndrome and you really have to work through that. And this is not me bragging on myself, just to say that I graduated top 20% of the class at Georgetown. And I did not think I was gonna pass day one. So it's just like some of it we just got to get out of our own heads. And similarly, joining JP Morgan, like that's like that's a big deal, right? And so coming into that firm, stepping into that role, there is a large part of me that I had to work through. Do I deserve this? You know, should I have a seat at the table? And what I'd say to that is, and again, I have to combat my own self with this, is never discount yourself. There's enough people in this world that's going to do that for you. So don't ever do that for yourself. Our counterparts are getting on the job training, regardless of whether or not they have the relevant, you know, skill set, and they get their on the job training and then they pass by, you know, they keep it moving. So we should be able to do the same. And so I just think that's very, very like important to just kind of overcome, because it is something to which, you know, I struggled with and I still struggle with it. Like B of A brought me in at like I'm a senior vice president right now getting paid. And like, you know, you step in and you're like, all right, well, like people are gonna expect a lot. People are gonna like want you to perform and want like they're gonna have high expectations because they're bringing you in at a pretty senior level. So again, just work through that, you know, imposter syndrome, have trusted mentors, have truth tellers, understand the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. Has someone kind of has that like does everybody know the difference? I don't know
Hey,
if that's
people have different definitions. Why don't you just give us yours?
sure. So I personally think as people of color, we do a great job with mentorship. I personally think, you know, you probably always have a mentor, be a mentor, and that's probably just coming natural to you. I don't necessarily know if we do the best job with sponsorship. And mentors are people that you can go to seek advice. Mentors are people that you can kind of lean on, bounce ideas off of, be a sounding board for. This is what I'm thinking. Um, Sponsors are very different. Sponsors are going to take care of your name when you're not in the room. Sponsors are going to be able to open up doors for opportunities that you didn't even know existed. So before, like, if someone announces they're going to retire, before that job is even posted, there are people who have identified for that role. That's
Right,
sponsorship, right? So
right.
it's very different. The mentorship is like, you know, oh, I'm thinking about, you know, I'm not sure which business school to go to. And so you need to talk to somebody about kind of like working through that. And that's important. I'm not, you know, minimizing it or diluting it. You just need both. It's very, very
Agree.
important to have sponsors.
I agree. And the way I've always heard it, which is exactly the way you said it, is that a mentor speaks with you. It's a conversation. You're discussing options. A sponsor speaks for you. You're not in the room. Uh, you're not around, and they're speaking positively about you. Then the third person is a coach. And that's a coach that speaks at you. It's like
Mhm.
basketball. You're running down the court. They're telling you to run a 2-1-2 or a 2-3 zone or whatever. They're speaking at you. It's a one-way conversation. And you're right.
Mhm.
You need all those kind of people in your life.
Yeah, yeah. I had the opportunity of meeting Cent Marshall. I don't know if you guys know who she is. She's the CEO of the Dallas Mavericks, black female, first black female CEO of an NBA team. Met with her 2 weeks ago at a Bank of America event, and she said that very similarly. She used the analogy of, you know, sports analogy, right? So like a
Good.
mentor being like more of a coach versus like a sponsor is more of an agent. They're advocating on your behalf. So
Right.
it'd be
Okay. I warned you all about questions. So now is your time. Please come forward with your questions. Go ahead, Pat. You got an investment question.
Hi,
Are you-
Megan. It's great to see you again, and
it is good.
congratulations. I
Thank
am
you. It's great
not
to see
surprised at all. So,
you.
as you know, I'm still at MOA, Charles Association of American. I work in transition, and I talk every day about exactly what we talk about. It's transferable work skill. In fact, I was just at the Naval Academy doing the ETAP class yesterday, and I had a lot of senior 06s, E9, but I digress. That's not my question. I have two colleagues who are on the finance side. And you may know Paul Frost retired. Tony, you may know Paul Frost. He's
Yeah,
a retired
absolutely.
P3 guy.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. No, Paul. Yes.
he and Lila are on the finance side, and we have this inbox that comes in called index. So I posted the questionnaire. They took a question somebody had about transferring their military TSP, that their savings plan, from their savings plan, I guess, to some other like investment company, whether it's Equitable or Bank of America. So they were questioning whether this is a good thing for them to do. And whoever they were dealing with said that their fees were a lot lower than the TSP. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on whether they, I don't know what advice Paul provided to them. Because I'm on the career transition side, but he's in the finance side. But I was just curious how that thought about that. And then my last comment I posted is my very first networking event as I was transitioning, when I was basically CNO's comptroller. I was a deputy director, deputy comptroller for CNO over at Field Support Activity. It was a Bank of America cyber networking event. And I'm still in touch with some of the folks I met there. Very impressive organization.
Well, thank you, Catherine Williams. Great to see you again, ma'am. I appreciate the question. I would
It's
first
just
say,
Pat, no more captain, no more ma'am.
Sure,
You're allowed to call me Pat.
okay. And that's a good point too. I mean, I'm respectful given the targeted audience, but when you do transition out of the military, there are no really sirs and ma'ams. I mean, if I met Jamie Dimon himself, there would be zero expectation to call him sir. In fact, it would be awkward. You would say Jamie, you'd still speak respectfully, but you'll call him by his first name, and there would
I can't believe Jamie Dimon is still hanging in there. I mean,
20
he was
years.
there when I was in San Antonio as a MEPS commander, and when I was going through my PhD program, one of the young ladies worked there and knew him personally. I just can't believe he's still hanging on, but he's doing great work there, so good on him.
Yeah. But to answer your question, probably not directly. I'd say, so I'm a commercial banker, right? So I am not a financial advisor. I'm not a financial planner. I do have my Series 7 license, so I'm licensed to give advice, but that is not my primary function, all right? I think expense. So when you think of fees, the fees that people talk about the most, and the fees that even for my own personal assets, you need to look at expense ratios. So from what I've learned, from what I've heard, TSPs typically have very low expense ratios. So you can keep your TSP at, within, you don't have to move it. I think it's personal preference, and it's depending on how you're investing your TSP, right? So I would hope that you're not just in like a G fund. I would hope that you're either at some kind of target fund and or deploying it. It depends on risk tolerance. It depends on timelines. It depends on age. So how I like to kind of explain it is everyone's going to be a little bit different. I think diversification is the most important thing when you think about that. So and just know your risk tolerance. If during 2020, when the market dropped 20-30%, what did you do? Did you panic and sell everything? Did you wince but sit on your hands? Or are you aggressive and you said, I'm going to get in every 20-30% off? It's a yard sale. I'm going to buy all the way to the bottom. Right. So you have to know kind of what your own personal risk tolerance is and be honest with yourself on that. Right. Because it's pocketbook. You got to be honest. And then look at your time horizon. Right. And so when I say everyone's different, is some people need to tap into their TSP because they want to delay deferral on Social Security, or some people know that they're not going to need their TSP for the first few years. And so how your money is moving in the market is going to be largely based on when you feel the need that you're going to need to tap into it. But to answer your question specifically on so I have a 401k at JPM and I have a 401k at B of A, and I have a TSP. I would look at expense ratio. So what I did is that I have a, life fund, growth fund, call it 2050, 2040, whatever the most aggressive, life cycle fund is at my TSP, which is fairly conservative. And then I'm extremely aggressive in all my 401k. So I have everything in the market. I have 100% in the market. But I say that because then I also have an IRA, and then my IRA is allocated differently, right? And then I also have 6 months worth of savings. And then so it's it's based on your risk tolerance. And I think I'm fairly risky. I also don't have kids. Let me preface that. No one's financially dependent on me. Right. I have 3 homes in my name that all have equity. Right. So it's what's your financial position, and everyone's financial position is going to be slightly different. If you do have the risk tolerance and the timeline and the horizon in the 6 months cash reserves, then you can be a little bit more risky. But to answer your question specifically, I would look at the expense ratio in your specific TSP and compare that to the expense ratio of what an equivalent security and equivalent investable fund is offering. and the expense ratios are going to tell you how, like, what are the fees involved. So I would look at expense ratio and I would look at performance. And if you don't like the way the TSP is performing, that might not be because it's a TSP, that might be because what you're investing in, right? And if you've invested in very conservative securities, then you're not going to get a return, right? The trade-off is risk versus reward. If you're invested in very risky securities, well, they got to pay you for that risk, so the return has to be there. If it's a very safe, like think of like bonds or, government T-bills, bonds, bills, like government funds are going to be very, very, very secure, but right now they're yielding 4%. Vice the S&P, could yield on a swing like last year, 20%, but then you could be, down 15, 20% like it was for the first quarter of 2020. So it really just depends on what your risk tolerance is, depends on your timeline, depends on your horizons. But look at the expense ratio specifically and look at the performance. And if you're not happy with the performance, look at what you're actually invested in. So specifically go in and look at like, how's your money being invested? And if you don't like that, then roll it over and do what you want with it. It's your money. You can roll it over to an IRA. You can roll it over to, you can combine 401ks. You can do what you want with that, with that money. And then you can choose how you want to deploy it. And I would say, if you're not comfortable having those conversations, then there are financial advisors that do this for a living and they can help kind of walk you through. I know USAA gives free financial advice and they have, they're fiduciary and they don't make any money on commissioning. So you can just call them and say, this is what I have. What do you recommend? And I used to do that for a long time before I, got comfortable enough to where I'm kind of off to the races on my own.
Great question. I mean, great answer. Biscuit, you got a hand raised.
Yes, thank you very much. This is great. So ACP, I use them, and like you said, very effective in. The guy that was my mentor worked for the University of Texas administration, so knew nothing about the military, and it was great because, like you said, I don't know what this means, so so that was very helpful. So given that we're transition assistants, and as I was listening to you, you talked about retiring at 50, which is another transition. So I'm just curious in one, what's significant about that that age, and then obviously you're doing things to set yourself up for that now, and if you'd like to elaborate on that.
Sure. I appreciate the question. So I'd say 50 is a little bit arbitrary. I just know that because I don't have kids, right? And again, my situation is going to be very individual and specific to me. I just know I need to have enough for me, my family, my aging parents, my 2 siblings. And so I think my financial situation is a little bit different. There's a book that's called Die with Zero. If you haven't read it, and it's written by, I forget his name.
What's it called again?
Die with Zero. And the premise behind it is that essentially at a very kind of high level, if you don't fly first class, your children will. And what it means is that oftentimes we hoard this money and we don't even know how much, or, we don't really even have a plan with how much we need or why we're saving it or how much, so the premise of Die with Zero is determine how much you need to retire. And that could be whatever you want to leave your kids, back that out, have that be a part of the calculation, and then back it out and then utilize and enjoy. Yes, Die with Zero. That's it.
It's Bill Perkins.
Yes.
I got to get that book because somebody told me, oh, when you're good to go, you're going to leave $3.5 million. I'm like, I don't want to leave $3.5 million to no one. I don't have a husband. I don't have a wife. I don't have kids. So
and if you don't,
I want to spend that money.
That's
go
right.
on the fly first class pad, give yourself permission. And so some of it is giving yourself grace, right? And so oftentimes, you just keep putting these acorns underneath the pillow. We don't even know what we're doing it for. So the premise is just have a plan, right? That's what your plan is gonna be different. My plan is gonna be different than the next person's plan, but have a plan and work backwards from that plan. And so what I like to do is an exercise, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy. You can just Google a template. But you should go through at least annually. I do it every 6 months. I wanted to do it every quarter, but it's exhausting. But once a year, just Google like net worth template and just go through, determine what's your net worth. What's everything that you own? and everything that you owe, right? And so you're looking at every account, every balance. You're checking your retirement account, you're checking your 401k, your TSP, your IRA, you're checking your, your savings. Then you're saying like mark to market your home. This is the value of my home. This is how much I owe. What's the equity in it? And then just like build that. And then if every 6 months you check it and that number is going up and to the right, well, you're you're doing something right, right? And so how I kind of think about retiring at 60, or excuse me, retiring at 50, I have 12 years worth of work. And mind you, I did 11 years in the Navy active. I did 3 in the reserves. I got out at 14 years, and everyone was like, why would you leave that on the table? And I'm not saying that I should. I'm not saying that was a good decision. What I'm saying is that everyone's situation is different. So I got 100% disability. So I got the VA coming through. So that's something. Every year, every day that I drill, I wasn't able to collect that. So every year I'd have to pay a portion back. But then you're like, oh, well, what about the pension? You would get it when you're 59 and a half. And that's true. And I'm not saying that that doesn't matter. It's just at the time, I was trying to learn this very, very complex job of being a banker. And I felt like I could not be everything to everyone, and I had to make a decision. So when I was in the reserves, I did 30 days downrange in Korea, and and JPM and B of A, they were very supportive, and they would have continued to support that, and it would not have been as problematic. But as a banker, I have clients. And so I would have to put my clients on hold for 30 days. Somebody would cover my portfolio, but again, like I wouldn't have the connectivity, I wouldn't have the depth in relationship. It's just being in a client facing banker role would not be as it just wouldn't be as easy as some of my buddies that fly. For American, they just are taken off the flight schedule for 30 days. They go down range, they come back, they do some modified workup to get current, and then they're back on the flight schedule. It's like plug and play. And so it's just not the same. And so I say that to say that I got out with 14, I'd say maybe 13 good years if you're looking at in that system, but 14 years and I left, I left the pension on the table. But, and if we're getting like very, very candid, like I went through and I did the math. So my pay has probably increased by it's more than doubled in the 5 years that I've been in finance, and I could double it again in about 3 to 4 years. And so me being all in on this job, yes, I'm leaving the pension on the table, and I'm not saying that's like not a small thing, but it's the earning potential of what I'm doing it for. And oh, by the way, once I get comfortable, once I get a book, once I decide, this is once I have my arms wrapped around, nothing precludes me from still going back into the Navy and serving 6 years. It doesn't have to be continuous service in the reserves. So for me, it was hustling, grinding, doing this. I bought when I was in DC, so I own a townhouse in Arlington, Virginia, to which that one cash flows about $500 a month. So that one's building equity. It's 1 mile from the Pentagon, kind of 2 miles from the White House as the bird flies, off of Columbia Pike and Courthouse Road, if whoever knows the area well. So I have that working for me. Have a home here. I bought my mom a home. And she's a really good tenant. So I have some real estate working for me. And then I've made some savvy investments. I got an NVIDIA at probably like 8 or 9 years ago, and now it's like the largest company and in the Fortune 500. So I just had a good pick. But I'd say by and large, it's steady on course. It's whatever your investment policy and whatever your investment strategy is, sticking to that. I think oftentimes too, what people fail to understand is it's not how much money you make, it's your association and your attitude towards money. Right? If you don't have the right association towards money, okay, your pay doubles. Congratulations, and you just buy, twice as expensive a car. I drive a Toyota Camry, and I don't care, right? Like, so just how you want to allocate your money, what's your attitude towards money? And so I just challenge each one of you to be thoughtful, be intentional, be deliberate about that. A lot of people really get uncomfortable when they talk about finances, right? It's like it's really hush hush. It's really kind of taboo. Open up about it. It matters. Find somebody that you trust. Find a financial advisor that that you don't feel like is just out to sell you a whole bunch of stuff. And then have a path, have a plan. Do that net worth template at least once a year, if not once every 6 months, and just keep trending up and to the right.
Outstanding. Okay, we got about 3 minutes left. I'm going to give you a couple of the tidbits that I wrote down here, just as a recap for some of those that may not have come in early. Knowledge gaps are okay. And I totally agree with you. We can learn anything. We can learn any skill set. Lean in on your veteran background and your fellow vets because they've got a lot to contribute. These coffee chats, they go by lots of different names, but I was interested that you called it a coffee chat because we've done similar things. And it's okay not to know, but what are you going to do about learning what you don't know? I think those are huge. So if you got any last tidbits, we got a couple of minutes, or we can take a final question, whatever feels good to you.
I'll say one thing quickly, and if anybody has a question, I'll float it at the end. But I'd say also, and again, this is not a quote from me. This is a quote that someone imparted on me. But make finding a job, right? Like employers, they're not looking for a candidate; they're looking for the candidate. So similarly, you shouldn't be looking for a job; you should be looking for the job. So diligence upfront, make finding a job. Like put in that time, and by putting in the diligence upfront, it's going to ensure that you're set up for success when it comes to placement, because oftentimes I see vets that kind of take the first job that's handed to them or the first job that's offered to them. Nothing's wrong with that, but like low hanging fruit. And then you see these veterans that kind of bounce around 2-3 times within the first 4 or 5 years because it's just not the right fit. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you can save yourself the ping pong just by putting in time on the front end, then you can find a job that's more commensurate with your interests, your passions, kind of just the better fit overall. And then you're off to the races and you can spend those 4 or 5 years organically moving through the company.
Very good. Well, listen, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you. I knew you would knock it out of the park when I asked you to do it, and that's why I proposed you. As I said earlier, we've had a steady diet of older, later in career transitioners, and it's refreshing to hear from someone who didn't go all the way to 30 or 35 plus, but your story is similar. People have leaned in on previous or standing relationships when that transition bell rings. And as I told you in our earlier discussion, the old guys say we rolled into our Rolodex and looked up the names of former department heads and former CEOs and XOs. I'm happy you didn't use that term because you're not old enough to appreciate what a Rolodex is. Guys like Ernie Taylor is very familiar with the Rolodex. And so we really appreciate you giving us some time. We know how busy it is and a brand new organization, 3 months in, recently transitioned. And I know it's hard to take time. Where you told me that your wife's mother had a medical issue earlier, yet you still stayed on track and gave us your time, Meagan. We really appreciate that. And we look forward to you becoming a part of this transition team if you so desire, knowing that you do a lot of it already in your other responsibility in the 4 Block Foundation. But
Absolutely.
feel free to come back anytime and contribute or ask questions or whatever role you're able to give us time. I'm going to save the final word for our kind of our leader here, Biscuit. You get the final word.
Before he does
Awesome.
that, I was using a 3x5 card, Tony.
That's called an Army Palm Pilot. Is a 3x5 card.
No, I appreciate your time, and I'll actually reach out to you because one of the things we're trying to do is get those service members that are considering separating, because not everyone's gonna do a full career. The majority are going to separate, and that's why we're here. We want to be that resource, whether they're considering profit, nonprofit, academia, entrepreneurship. And so we'd like to have a wealth of experience in those different sectors so that that network is strong. So looking forward to connecting with you. And thanks again. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Okay, we'll turn off the recording now.
Thanks, everybody. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Humble to be a part of it. Appreciate you guys listening.